So I just want to thank everyone for your time and openness to hearing about UNICEF's role in COVID-19 vaccine delivery. I'd like to give you a bit of background on UNICEF, the organization, and then also how it came to be in the position to be the lead implementing partner for the COVAX facility. I would just kind of ground the presentation in the work of UNICEF. So this picture is of a vaccinator in some of the most western remote regions of Nepal, and she's they're interacting with her son who's being held by her colleagues. So that's just to show how far it is that UNICEF is the lengths that UNICEF will go to ensure vaccination and safety for people to prevent the COVID-19 virus. So play a video that will in some ways capture the global scale and then also the enormity of this mission, the world's largest ever vaccine and public health campaign.
What does it take to make history? What does it take to fight for equality? To race to bring a pandemic to a halt? A pioneering spirit, relentless innovation, 75 years of delivering results, a global network of partners, the passion of a team who will never give up. This is how UNICEF became the largest vaccine buyer and distributor in the world. This is how UNICEF helps vaccinate nearly half the world's children every year in the hardest to reach places. Our systems were made for this. Our people were made for this. We know we can make history happen. We can get the COVID-19 vaccines to at least 20% of the world's population by the end of the year, delivered to the countries that need assistance, for the healthcare workers and vulnerable populations, the people who need it most. But we need you, because history is not made just by one, but by the collective, by the choices we make, and by the partnerships we forge. Together, we can make this happen. Together, we can make history.
Sorry about that. Come back into the presentation just quickly. So from that, I just wanted to transition into talking about UNICEF's global reach. So UNICEF is in 190 countries, and it's the world's leading advocate for children. It's also the world's largest organization, children's organization. And with 13,000 plus staff, UNICEF is running programs, as I said, in everything from education to nutrition to water, hygiene, sanitation, things from as traditional as simple books and pencils. So UNICEF is the world's largest purchaser of pencils to technologies at the forefront of making digital learning available to children, students in areas where there's low connectivity. So the Learning Passport is a partnership that was developed with Microsoft that allows children to continue their education when they are outside of school, something that was incredibly important, we know, in the past year when schools were closed due to the pandemic. So with that global reach, as I mentioned with the pencils, UNICEF is also the world's largest procurer of vaccines. So prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, UNICEF procured and delivered a third of all vaccines in the world. So it's UNICEF's negotiating power, the scale at which it operates, that allows it to actually shape markets and drive down the costs for routine immunizations for children. So this allows countries that don't have the same procurement processes as, say, in Ireland, to use UNICEF or to partner with UNICEF for UNICEF to use its negotiating powers on behalf of the country to secure routine immunizations such as polio and measles. And so in that work, in that decades-long work, is where UNICEF has built up not only the expertise in negotiation, the market shaping capabilities, but also the infrastructure that allows it to bring vaccines to countries into some of the most remote regions in the world, as we had seen earlier in that picture from Nepal. So in 2020, the WHO, Gavi, which is the Vaccine Alliance, and CEPI knew that there was going to be successful vaccine candidates, and they set up a number of structures, one of which is the COVAX facility. COVAX facility is over not only the vaccine delivery and vaccine procurement as part of the COVID-19 response, but it also deals with the PPE and also the communication. So the personal protective equipment, the gloves, the masks, and the other garb, along with the communications for communities on vaccine safety, and also helping to combat vaccine hesitancy within communities. So it's across a number of parts. UNICEF is the lead on the procurement and delivery component of COVAX. And as I said, that's back to the decades of experience, not only for those routine immunizations and the negotiating with the pharmaceutical companies, but also in getting the vaccine out of the manufacturing plant onto the tarmac, into the plane, down into the country, into the van, onto a truck, then out onto the field, whether that be sometimes by bicycle or donkey, and then finally to the vaccinators, and then into the arm, because it's not just the vaccines that prevent COVID-19, it's the vaccinations themselves. So just a little more on COVAX, and here I'd like to just touch on where the specific focus is, and that's around the equity of it. So as we know, at this time, it's almost hard to imagine that we were waiting on vaccines within Ireland, now having gone through multiple rounds in the past year, and then also a very wide booster campaign. But this doesn't happen to be the case for the 92 poorest countries where UNICEF is supporting the delivery of COVID-19 vaccines. So in that year, there's been a tremendous amount accomplished. So just over 1.2 at this point billion vaccines have been delivered, and that's also it's not just about the vaccine deliveries, but it's also about helping to build out the critical infrastructure. So it's the cold chain and the ultra cold chain. So if we are aware of or a recipient of the Pfizer vaccine, that required ultra cold chain technology, which meant that it had to be kept at temperatures below zero, whereas most routine immunizations, because the technologies and the vaccinations are so developed at this point, they don't need to be held in that ultra cold chain. So in order to make sure that the vaccines still had efficacy when they arrived, UNICEF had to work with countries to build out their cold chain. And that's a long-term investment. That's a part of building out the infrastructure, because that then can be used for future routine immunization programs, and also to continue to carry out immunization programs against COVID-19. So UNICEF's role in COVAX is, as I had shared before, multifaceted, but it is again about that infrastructure piece, which is our teams are co-leading global efforts on health systems. So when these investments are made into the COVAX facility, it is to help very tangibly deliver vaccines from manufacturers to countries, and then out to the healthcare professionals who themselves need to be vaccinated in order to stay safe, but who will also be vaccinating communities. But when those investments are being made into the COVAX facility, it's also helping to provide technical guidance and training for healthcare workers. As I said, it's critical in helping to address the misinformation around vaccines. And then it's also helping to strengthen their cold chain and supply chain. And so again, that continues on through the process of distribution of COVID-19 vaccines, but also it helps to strengthen the routine immunization programs for children. So another way to ground this, I think, and this might be helpful for members, so there's been a renewed focus after the pandemic on the Sustainable Development Goals. UNICEF as a UN agency is responsible and has responsibility for leading on a number of the Sustainable Development Goals, in particular education, nutrition, and health. But for the purposes of today's webinar, I just wanted to highlight specifically UNICEF's role in SDG 9. And so when companies, businesses are supporting UNICEF as part of their CSR or their ESG and looking at how they report and how they, as a company, realize their objectives in moving towards helping to realize the SDGs. It's back to, again, that infrastructure and also that innovation piece. So UNICEF is building out the infrastructure for the cold chain for vaccine delivery, but at the same time, UNICEF is always working with partners. So if it's on the COVAX facility, it may be the WHO or Gavi, but it also will work with partners, and that includes the private sector to develop technologies, and in this instance, to develop technologies to keep vaccines cold. Another instance of this in the COVID-19 response was in May of last year when there was a shortage of oxygen and oxygenation plants within the country of India. UNICEF worked with partners to develop and refine oxygenation plants that were easier to manufacture and easier to transport, so that for future crises, it would be the timeline to get those pieces of technology to hospitals and to areas of need would be greatly reduced. So with that, I just want to say thank you. Greatly appreciate the time and the interest that the chambers have expressed in the Get a Vaccine, Give a Vaccine. The private sector has played an incredibly important role in support for vaccine equity over the past year, not just through strategic corporate grants, but also in amplification. So it's very important that that UNICEF partner with the private sector, because it does help to attract additional support and interests, and that leads to conversations that can be, as I said, multifaceted. Everything from talking to companies about strengthening the cold chain, to working with companies to refine oxygenation plants, to corporate grants that are based around inspiring employees and then also discharging the ESG or corporate social responsibility objectives of the company. And with that, I'll stop sharing the presentation and open it up to conversation or any questions that any of us in the audience or any of those in the audience might have. Thank you.
Could I jump in there? On a fantastic presentation, thanks very much, and really interesting to hear firsthand all of the stuff and the places that UNICEF is involved in, and indeed the partnerships they have with the World Health Organization and others as well. It's really very reassuring, I guess, to hear that all of that is going on, because as we get on with our day-to-day lives, and indeed this is, you know, a consistent challenge that we have in chambers, where we are doing very good work all the time. We're identifying various initiatives and things that are essential and important for business, but trying to get, you know, engender the awareness of what we're doing and why these things that we're doing are important, and then to get engagement. That's the challenge, and I would see that for you at the moment as a huge challenge, particularly since COVID seems to have gone away in a lot of countries. We know that's not true, but it has certainly become a far less pressing issue and concern. Indeed, in Ireland at the moment, you know, we're much more comfortable. There's lots of infections around, but not so much sickness and serious illness. So we're getting on with life, and that's great. And then, of course, we have the debacle in Ukraine unfolding, and that's taking up all of the news space as well. So people's heads are full of this stuff, and perhaps, you know, important messages like the one you've just outlined to us this morning can get lost. And I guess that's kind of really my question is, like, UNICEF obviously have an ongoing promotional campaign and that, but what additional things are you doing or trying to do, and indeed that perhaps we can help with, given the other challenges and distractions that are out there for the majority of people?
Well, thanks, John. Thanks so much. I think you've captured a lot in there. So I'll just go through some of those pieces and just to first ground it in Ireland. I think at this time last year, we didn't imagine that we were going to have access to vaccines, but I was speaking to the ICGP and they were saying people don't believe that the vaccines are going to be here, but by the time come May, the country will be absolutely flooded with them and people won't remember a time before. And you are correct in pointing out that that doesn't happen to be the case for the rest of the world. So there are some stark graphics that we could have included, which is that high income countries that are approximately around 70% vaccination rate. Low and middle income countries, which is the area of focus for UNICEF, at around that 10%. And then if you pull out specific countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo, they're at approximately 1 to 2% vaccine coverage. So there's a very vast gap between where countries like Ireland are at this point and where those countries are. And again, that's why COVAX is important, not just in the vaccine delivery, but building out the infrastructure and then also on that communications piece. You're correct. It is like the Chamber's experiences yourselves, a competition sometimes for space in terms of communicating a message. I included the graphic number 9 on the infrastructure because UNICEF is a part of the infrastructure for a number of countries for their vaccine delivery. We were on a call last week with a representative for UNICEF Ukraine. So UNICEF have currently 130 staff in Ukraine. UNICEF has been there for 25 years. UNICEF was in the separatist region, in the contact line, and in the government-controlled region prior to the escalation in the conflict last week. UNICEF was also part of the COVID-19 vaccine rollout within Ukraine. So that would be the vaccinations for adults, in addition to being part of the implementer for routine childhood immunizations. Due to the conflict, which had been going on for 8 years and even prior to its escalation, there was an outbreak of polio in Ukraine in 2021. And just to give context, the only other countries where there are outbreaks of polio, which is now part of childhood routine immunizations, would be there was a case of wild polio in Malawi recently, then Afghanistan and Pakistan were the other countries. So to give you a kind of a benchmark to understand what the situation is in Ukraine. UNICEF will continue to be in Ukraine, and we are very much seeing a lot of interest from corporates. And so we do try to, we're across 190 countries, and many of those countries we're running programs, and it's a wide gamut of programs that UNICEF is able to implement because of its size, scale, and being a UN agency. But we also do try to be sensitive to whatever is occurring at the time and try to meet the public and companies where they are. Is that helpful, or is that too much talking? Sorry.
That's super. Thanks, Owen. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Owen. Definitely very interesting presentation, and it is a case of, you think you have an idea of what's going on nearly in some of these situations, but in reality, you know, I suppose you probably wouldn't have pictured UNICEF as being the world's biggest purchaser of vaccines when you think of some countries like the US and the population size of some of those, and it's just phenomenal work that's been carried out, and it's great to hear, you know, from yourself a little bit more insight into that and the work that's gone on, you know. And I suppose first off, yes, we do hope that, you know, the 130 staff that you have on the ground in Ukraine do keep safe, and hopefully we'll see them all safely home again. And you know, it is shocking to see what's going on there. What I'll be doing afterwards is I'll work on this piece and we'll edit it out and share it out to members as well. But for members who, you know, decide, you know, look at this and go, well, what's the easiest way? What's the easiest way for me to engage and to try and help a bit? Because it's one of the challenges sometimes I always see with companies, and they see something but they don't see how they can help sometimes. What is the easiest ways that you would say that some of the members could? Is it just to contact you directly and to start the ball rolling from there? But if how would you kind of give us guidance on that?
Yeah, it's to contact me directly, absolutely. As you can imagine, the volume this week of interactions with businesses is absolutely jumped, you know, particularly after the news coverage that we saw over the weekend, the escalation. So I'm mindful of the fact that I'm not as accessible as I typically am. That being said, I'm best placed within Unicef Ireland to help a business action on whatever it might be that they'd like to do. So at this point, it's really a matter mostly of providing supply of cash to Unicef. So corporate grants is what we're looking for. We have been vetting opportunities from companies, transport companies that are interested in bringing in supplies, but the situation is moving too quickly. And although we would typically be able to issue guidance around in-kind contributions, that isn't the case at this moment, and it looks as if it would be issued next week. But I wouldn't say that that's necessarily the case. So it would be corporate grants that we're looking for initially. The other thing as well is introductions and networking. So it was an introduction to Brian. It wasn't that Brian and I knew each other before. It was a member of the Carlow Chamber who introduced us. So those are incredibly important to us for a number of reasons, because, you know, Unicef is an organization. It's always more helpful for somebody to speak to an individual within that organization than just to look at it. My colleagues that work in donor care services at the front door are tremendous in the work that they do, but obviously they don't have access to the materials and the guidelines that I would have around how we engage with businesses. So as you can imagine, when an organization like Unicef is engaging with business to procure a third of the world's vaccines, we also have to go through a pretty careful due diligence practice. So just in this instance, it's, you know, with pharmaceutical companies, so we have to be very careful in how we engage with them, because because Unicef is in active negotiations with these companies, so we can't have multiple conversations opened up and with any one company across different countries. Those all have to be completely aligned from a central place globally. So yeah, again, that amplification piece I think is really important. So Unicef has a tremendous suite of assets, from videos to imagery to human interest stories. We would encourage everybody to follow us on social media across LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And then more specifically, we would encourage anybody who has an interest in the evolving situation in Ukraine to follow UNICEF Ukraine as well for timely updates on what they're doing there. I would just note that there's a time of sensitivity right now around external communication from UNICEF regarding the conflict within this. There's a 36-hour window which we're in right now, so there might be a bit of quietness from UNICEF. If you don't see us in the media right now, there's an embargo that exists, but after that there will be more active communication.
I was struck as well when you mentioned in relation to polio outbreaks. Because I know through Rotary clubs and Rotary International that that organisation is very vested in its determination to eliminate polio completely from the globe, and we're so close to achieving that. It's always a setback when we hear of a new outbreak, as you just mentioned. I hadn't actually been aware that it had occurred, that one had occurred in Ukraine. Generally speaking, it tends to happen in the most remotest parts of the remotest countries, or the hardest to get to, like those areas of Pakistan and Afghanistan and so on. I was surprised that that unfortunately Ukraine was mentioned there as well. 2021.
Yeah, and that speaks to the ongoing conflict that had existed there for 8 years, the kinds of breaks in the health infrastructure that had caused. There's a pretty noticeable difference between eastern Ukraine and the more metropolitan areas like Kiev. And again, that's why UNICEF has to remain impartial and neutral and work with whichever government or governing body or group is in control in an area to make sure that it can still get there with the routine immunizations, so that children don't risk being paralyzed due to a polio infection for the rest of their lives. So it is, and UNICEF has partnered with Rotary in the past, because it is an important part of Rotary's work on polio immunizations, and there was backsliding over the past during the pandemic on routine immunizations, because healthcare workers in some of these countries weren't vaccinated and they couldn't go out to remote regions themselves. And so that's, the infrastructure, it's in some instances bridges and roads, in some instances it's broadband, but in some instances it's also having a healthcare worker who's been vaccinated against COVID-19, who's able to go into these communities and to vaccinate the populations, and so that they can also, while there, carry out routine immunizations for children.
I just want to doing a great job at asking all the pertinent questions. It's very informative. I'm agog at my screen listening. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that, Owen, and thank you for your time. I think it's something that we all need to be part of, and it's a wider conversation. We've all been vaccinated here in Ireland, and a lot of first world countries, so it's important that other countries that don't have that resource, that we support them. So it's good to be informed about the work that you do, particularly when we're out meeting our members, to make them aware how they can help, because I know even people personally, they were part of the Give a Vaccine program when they were getting their own vaccine, and it makes such a big difference, even something so small like that.
Yeah, just to finalize, I was just staggered by the percentages that you used, that are in the developed world so far, that you can say that we're 70% and upwards vaccinated, whereas in some of the other less developed countries it's as low as 1%. Like, that is mind-boggling, really, and it just emphasizes the importance of getting the vaccine out to everybody, because it's not over till it's over.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those variants of concern, our experience with Omicron from December and over the Christmas holiday, would have shown us that really it isn't over until it's over. And we're saying as well is that the pandemic won't end one country at a time, because if anybody's unvaccinated, we're all at risk. And the push is 70% coverage within 2022, which is possible. But again, the reality at the same time is that when there's a crisis like there is in Ukraine, it does require us to go even further above and beyond, and to dig deeper, which UNICEF can and will do in the reality of these crises.